Deans Lane, speaking with Carmine and Josie Zarillo Inzetta. And we're just going to listen to all your memories and good memories of South Brunswick. So Carmine, did you want to start? You were born here, Carmine?
Yes, I was born in the year of 1910. And we used to live in Sand Hills area, which was a wooded area, part of the Mama Junction in South Brunswick Township. When I was 2 years old, my parents bought a piece of ground on Deans Lane. They had a house built by Prime Buckaloo for the sum of $900.
It's Jamesburg.
With a payment of $10 per month. And if you couldn't meet the payments, you had an extension of time with no penalty. Compare that with today.
Good people.
And when I was around 5.5 years old, I think, I went to Dean's School, which was a two-classroom schoolhouse with a room in the back of the school building and a room in the front with a cloak room in each room and a coal bin in the back of the school, which was heated by a pot stove, heated by coal. And as I remember, when I went from the 3rd grade and skipped to 4th grade, I thought maybe my grades were pretty good, that I was moved I was moved into the 5th grade. Later I found out that there was not enough room on the 4th row, which was called the 4th year, and was moved into the front room in the 5th row because there was an empty seat there.
Who was your teacher?
As I recall...
Excuse me, you remember the teacher's name?
Yes, my teacher's name, what near as I can remember, was Miss Ferguson in the lower grades, and Mr. Yoon, who had the higher grades.
And where was that school located exactly?
The school was located approximately half a mile from the Deans Lane and George's Road corner. And I remember walking to school through a dirt road which was called Deans Lane. When we approached the George's Road, there used to be a toll gate and charged 10 cents for a horse and wagon to enter the George's Road and the old model automobiles. Near as I can remember, the toll gate was put there because they upgraded George's Road, which was a stone and gravel road. And I remember seeing 50-gallon drums every 100 feet or so along the George's Road, which was later heated up and sped over the stone road. Near as I can figure out, that's what the toll was for. The toll bridge, or the toll gate rather, was operated by Al Baker, a brother of William Baker, who was the surveyor for most of the township area. The Pennsylvania Railroad Station, which was a 4-track lane, a dangerous area, which has now been upgraded with an underpass. And Deans used to have one of the biggest railroad stations that was located on the south side of the Pennsylvania Railroad, with a large warehouse and a large cattle area and a side track that used to deliver coal and stones for the people that used to have coal stoves.
Yeah, was that the Werner Company? Did they deliver to Werner's, the coal?
Right, which was called the Werner's.
Werner's?
Which, one of the distributors was the Werner's Coal and Feed Mill, which was located alongside of the railroad yard in a building that was called the Hay Press. And the reason they called that the hay press is because the farmers used to take their straws to be baled into hay, which was operated by a mule attached to a long pole which went around the circle, which was operated to make the bale of hay. Alongside of that, hay press was a bar room which was operated by the Dyker family, which later was occupied as a residence by the Curran family. Alongside of that bar room, there used to be a building the size of a 1 or 2 car garage, which used to house the ice that was cut by the Terhunes on a Deans pond, on a Davis's Mill pond. The ice in those days looked to me like it was around 12 inches by 12 inches by 16 inches, about the size of a cement brick. And they used to store it in this here ice house, which was laid in layers with sawdust in the middle so the ice cubes wouldn't stick to one another. And the partitions were approximately 12 inches wide, filled with sawdust to keep the ice from melting through the early parts of summer. The ice was used for people that used to have ice boxes in those days.
And icemen to deliver them.
Which was delivered by what we called an iceman.
Do you remember who that was?
No, I don't remember the iceman's
You
name.
have a good memory. Fantastic.
And as we went down further on Deans Lane, there used to be a building there which was called the Shoemaker Store, run by the Hemmler family. The Shoemaker Store sold boots and rubbers, repaired shoes, and also in the same building the Dean's Post Office was occupied there, which was run by postmaster by the name of Lena Hemmler. Probably recall
I
some
remember
of the
her, yes.
Yeah.
And as you went down further on the corner of Deans Lane, there was the post office building is no longer there. And as you approached the corner of Deans Lane and the Old George's Road, there was another small building there which was called the Candy Store, which was later occupied by the Smith family. Alongside it called the Weber's watch repair store, which is now the Weber's appliance store. The building is still there, used as an appliance store. A few feet further from that was going north on Georges Road was the Dean's Chapel. As I can remember, that's all we used to call it, was the Dean's Chapel.
Which is a home now.
Which is now occupied as a home. The building is still there. Across the way from the chapel, on the corner of what was called the Deans Road Hall Road, there was a general store which was operated by the Gillians, and later was used as a home which was occupied by the Shue family. Mr. John Shue was the tax collector for South Brunswick Township.
Was he the first collector?
Yeah, and he was a tax collector for a good many years, as I remember. Then across the way from the Deans Road Hall Deans Road Hall Road, there was a building there called the Mulchi Flour and Bread Store. The building was later occupied by the Gruber family, and the Gruber family building is still there. Approximately a quarter of a mile further was the Dean's School, which is now occupied as a home, and the building is still there. Dean's area had two flour mills, one located at the Davison Mill Pond and one at the Dean's Pond. Those two ponds were largely used by the people in the area for sleigh riding, fishing, and during the winter, ice skating, which used to draw large crowds, which you don't see there today, especially the one mill that was at the Dean's Pond. When the dam broke down, it was never repaired, and it looks like a retaining basin there with a brook running through it, which is, my estimation, an eyesore. I'd like to see that dam built and the lake put back there.
We all would.
Yeah. I used to ice skate and fish there when I was a kid. Yeah. Good fishing, good entertainment there.
Now, who ran the mills? Who were the mill owners?
The mill, near as I remember, I don't know who first ran it, but it was run by the Werner family.
Both of them? The Davison Mill and the Dean's Pond one?
And the Dean's Pond was run by, in the early days, as I can remember, the name was Aaron Dean, who had a home which was alongside of the Dean's Pond. And I think that's where the town of Deans was named after Aaron Dean. What else I can say about Deans?
Well, one of the buildings became a synagogue, right?
It became a what?
A synagogue or temple?
Yeah, that the Jewish people have
Right.
here now.
Whereabouts is that?
Where Abe Dobin's synagogue was.
I don't recall the synagogue.
Do you know where it was, Josie? You can tell us too. Yeah. If you anything you remember.
I know,
you can
but I'm not good in direction.
Synagogue?
Lived in that area?
Yeah, in that area.
Okay. Was that where the old school was?
Yeah.
The old school that became the synagogue?
Well, tell them how many families went to Dean's School.
Well, the Dean's School was mostly occupied by 5 families, which was the Sassos, the Duenas, the Kerns, the Petrofisses, and the Inzettas,
Bifocals?
and the Bifocals. I think that the others were just few strays around, but that made up Dean's School.
Do you remember when the underground tunnel was built under the railroad? What year that may have been?
It ought to be in the area of around minus or plus around 1927. Yeah, very close to that.
So Deans was a pretty busy town.
Right.
Now, when did your parents come to this country?
When did it what?
Your parents? When did they immigrate?
I don't quite recall when my parents came from Italy and lived in New York before they moved into the Sandhills area, which had to be in the early 1900s. I lived in the Deans area and moved 3 times, and I'm still on Deans Lane.
How many sisters and brothers?
I was one of the 5 boys and 4 girls in my family. In those days, most of the families had large families,
In good times.
right?
And now he's the only one left out of the boys, and there's 3 girls left.
Were you the youngest?
What's that?
No, you weren't the youngest of the boys. Charlie was.
No, I was the,
You, about the middle. Jimmy was the oldest.
1, 2, 3, I was one of the 4th generation of the boys.
And Louise? I know Louise.
Louise still
Yeah.
lives in the homestead on Dean's Lane.
Went to school with Louise.
Yeah. And then he was lucky he met me.
Yeah, that's for
Where
sure.
was that, Josie?
I came from North Brunswick.
Uh-huh.
I came from New York when I was 5 years old. I lived in North Brunswick all those years. Now I'm living in South Brunswick. It's going to be 59 years, June the 25th. I'll be married 59 years to the same man.
Great.
Today they don't live 59 hours and they get a divorce.
And she
So
never
I'm
had
still
so
looking.
good.
I'm still looking. I'm still looking. Even though I got all new parts, but I'm still walking around.
Keep going, Josie. You're doing fine. So, when were you married?
I was married June the 25th, 1938. I have 2 daughters. My oldest is Lois Jones. She lives on Dean's Lane. She's got 2 boys. One is in college and one is in South Brunswick High School, and she's a teacher there. My Lorraine works for Nassau Capital in Princeton, and she is not married. She didn't find anybody worthy of her yet. So she's living home with Mother and Dad. And makes us coffee every night to make sure that we stay awake. But she's a wonderful, I got 2 beautiful daughters. And I'm happy, and I think he's happy. If he's not, he could walk out anytime he wants to.
Now, Carmen, you went to school and then you went to work. We left that part out.
Yeah, the most important part.
When we first got electricity in the Deans area, my father bought a water pump. And the salesman, which was, we called Slippery Style, he wore a fedora hat and spats on his white shoes. This is why we call them Slippery Saturday. But he never installed the pump, so my brother and I undertook the job of putting the pump in, and we had running water.
To dig the well?
So
Excuse me, did you dig the well for the water?
my father, the water was taken from a well that was dug by hand by my father, and had to dynamite the stone in order to get a vein of water. So because my father bought a pump, the neighbors wanted one, and finally one pump sold another, and I went around selling the pumps when I was 14 years old. But I could only afford to pay for one pump. So I took the nameplate reading of the pump that my father bought and wrote the company, which was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and told them that I had a sale of 36 pumps. But I could only afford to pay for one pump at a time. So they sent a representative from Fort Wayne, Indiana, that went into the New York office. From the New York office, they took a train to the Pennsylvania station in New Brunswick. Then they took a cab and came down Deans Lane. I remember sitting on a rail fence in front of my father's house. This cab pulled up and says, "Can you tell me where Mr. Inzetta lives?" And I says, "Yes, he lives right here." He says, "Is he home?" I says, "No. He works as a foreman in a sectional gang on the Pennsylvania Railroad." And they answered by saying, "When does he find time to sell pumps?" And I says, "Oh, that's not my father, that's me." And they looked at this kid sitting on a rail fence, which in those days used to wear short pants. What do you call those?
Knickers? Knickers?
Yeah.
And barefooted?
So they said, "Did you send this letter?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you mind sitting in the car? We'd like to have a talk with you." I said, "No, you can talk to me, and I'll sit right here on the rail fence." So they finally made me a proposition that they would send the pumps, providing I had a place to put them, and a place to pick them up, and a place to where they could deliver them. And I wouldn't have to pay them until I sold the pumps and collected the money. Which again, that doesn't happen these days. So I finally told them that I could use a horse and wagon, that I could pick up the pumps at the Deans Railroad station. And they said, "Where would you store the pumps?" I says, there was a barn just built alongside the Vitale family that was never used, and they would let me store the pumps in that building. So they finally sent the pumps, but they were different than the pumps that I installed in my father's house. What made them different was the motors, which had several different connections. I hooked up these pumps and I burned half of the motors up.
Oh boy.
That I finally learned that vocational school in New Brunswick had an electric shop, and I wanted to get into the electric shop in the vocational school. But my parents was told that everyone should get a high school education, and they made me go to New Brunswick High School. I only attended the New Brunswick High School for 2 weeks, and I was expelled by starting a fight. We used to ride the train from the country, called me a hayseeder, because I lived in the country, and that's what started the fight. And his teacher saw me striking him to where he got a bloody nose, grabbed me by the collar and told me that they didn't tolerate kids like me in that school. I looked up at him and I said, "You're right." My mother used to pack my lunch in a brown bag, which I left on the side of the auditorium, along with the books, and walked out. And went to the vocational school, which I wanted to go in the first place. But the school was filled up. They had a waiting list, and all the shops were taken. So I finally still went to New Brunswick by train, not telling my family that I wasn't going to no school. Then finally, Mrs. Rule was the secretary to the principal of the vocational school, which was Mr. Stein. I sat alongside of her on a seat in a train going to New Brunswick, and she says to me, "How are you making out in high school?" I said, "What high school?" I says, "I haven't been going to high school for 2 weeks." She says, "What have you been doing?" I said, "I couldn't get in vocational school." I said, "Because they were filled up." And she said, "Well, what have you been doing?" I said, "Well, I took a job selling a newspaper in the New Brunswick railroad station." And I remember the first day that I sold the paper, that the home news,
the immediate area, St. Paul's and then Jamesburg, and then Lawrenceville to the southwest. There wasn't anything in Plainsboro or Cranberry. Guess you would have to go over to Freehold to find the next parish in that direction.
Well, growing up in St. Cecilia's, the St. Joseph's priests were really the priests that we related to, because our pastor, we wouldn't see that often.
He would be in Jamesburg.
He would be in Jamesburg, so
Yeah.
you were kind of the backbone of our church.
Yes, as I just recalled about Father Crescentius Herr, my physics teacher here. He was the one who said, as a young priest, he was just ordained when he came here, and I think he had just been ordained when he went to St. Cecilia's to say the first Mass in that mission church. And we still have the chalice here, which he used. It was a very huge, it's really a museum piece. And if I could show it to you sometime, I'd be glad to. Used for the first Mass over in Monmouth Junction, 1914. The chalice, as I said before, is really a museum piece. To describe all the symbolism on it, we'd have to begin, I suppose we can begin at the very top. Here are angel faces, and then the theme that goes around entirely is the vine and the branches. See the grapes and the vine and the grape theme continuing around, and then down the lower section have all these precious and semi-precious stones. The symbolism on this lower section, first here we have the key rho symbol, the first three letters of the name Christos, Christ in Greek, a key rho. The X is the CH in Greek, and the P, what looks like our letter P, is the R in Greek. So it's the name Christos in Greek, or Christ. This symbol is the symbol of the pelican. The pelican eats its young, and so the pelican here is seated above its nest with its young and ready to pierce its breast, symbolic of the Eucharist and Christ nourishing us by his body and blood in the Eucharist. This symbol is the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last letters of the Greek alphabet, symbolizing Christ, the beginning and the end of everything. And the next symbol is IHS. This is the name Jesus in Latin. The I is the J, and the H, what looks like an H to us, is the long E, and the S, the same. So the first three letters of the name Jesus in Latin. And here's the kingly crown, Christ as King of the universe, surmounted by a cross, crown surmounted by a cross. And here is the Star of David, symbolizing the old covenant, Christ coming from the line of David, the king. The lower symbols are the four evangelists, the writers of the gospel. This is the symbol of St. Mark. Here is the symbol, the eagle, the symbol of St. John, absorbed in his literature in the fourth gospel. Here is the symbol of Luke, and then the symbol of Matthew. Here's the symbol of Christ crucified, Christ on the cross, and the symbol of the Holy Spirit, the dove. So that's the symbolism on the chalice, which is filled with wine and which is consecrated at every Mass, and we believe becomes the body and the blood of Christ, the bread and the wine in the chalice. On this paten is the host. That host is that which becomes the body of Christ at Mass. The symbolism on the back of the paten is of the Paschal Lamb, the conquering Lamb, who was sacrificed, but yet by his sacrifice conquers, and there's the symbol of the conquering cross. Above it, it says in Latin, panis vivus, living bread, and below, Agnus Dei, Lamb of God. So that these are the words which are said at communion time. Ecce, behold, Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world. And the congregation responds similarly. Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us.
Very good, Father. I can stay right here and go ahead. Mm-hmm.
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We're here in the public chapel of St. Joseph's Seminary and the Vincentian Renewal Center. So we're looking at the west window. It's rather cloudy outside. When the sun comes through, the yellows stand out much better than now. The central figure there is Christ the King, and to the left is his mother, Blessed Mother, and to the right is Christ pictured as the Good Shepherd. The windows in the chapel try to take on the hue of the blue color of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Chartres. The windows which are being shown now are the 12 apostles. There are 6 apostles on this side. We're standing in the middle of the sanctuary, and these 3 windows on this side depict the 12 apostles. Below the 12 apostles are the 12 prophets of the Old Testament. And as we turn we're going, and the windows on the east chapel. And now we're facing the eastern window, which is the window of the life of Saint Joseph, the spouse of Mary, the guardian of Christ. And as he comes up to our right, the windows directly opposite us now will be the other 6 apostles and the 6 more prophets of the Old Testament. The inscriptions under them are all in Latin, but the one directly in front of us now is St. Thomas and St. Matthew. And as we go more to our right, we have St. Simon and St. Matthias. Shown now is the canopy over the main altar. Top is the statue of Virgo Potens, and as comes down on this wrought iron baldacchino or canopy over the main altar, we come to the crucifix, which is silver on ebony. That crucifix was on exhibition in the Metropolitan Museum of Art before it was placed here. It was built for this canopy. Notice if you can, the expression on the face of Christ there. It's a rather muscular body, but a very pained expression on the countenance. That INRI above stands for Latin words Jesus Christos Rex Iudiorum, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. An appellation which was given at the time of his crucifixion. And below is the main altar. That's Bianca Formosa, one piece of solid marble for the mensa or the table of the altar. And the steepants, the feet of the altar there, depict the 4 saints who had particular devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. The marble foot, the marble pedestal at the foot of the altar is Vermont green, very hard marble. The candlesticks on either side of the floral display to our left are of bronze with silver inlay. The screen behind the altar, on either side, is also of wrought iron, made in Westport, Connecticut, in about 1932, by a man by the name of Kenneth Lynch, who also, his company, not him, but his company made the clock in the Princeton Market Fair, which is in the middle of the mall there. The light fixtures are also of wrought iron. And as he travels up to the roof, the ceiling is of Appalachian oak, and that ceiling actually holds up the slate roof. The arches were bent in the shape of the arch in the old Brooklyn Navy Yard, having been steamed first and then bent in the shape of the arch. So the weight of the roof comes down onto those arches and then extends out to the walls and then goes down into the ground, so that the whole chapel is one simple nave. There is no transept in this chapel, but the nave, navis in Latin, means ship. If you were to turn the chapel upside down, you'd be in the hull of a ship. As our camera is turning around toward the console of the organ, it's a 3-manual organ with a set of pedals. The organ itself is contained in chambers. As he turns to his left, on either side of this In those two chambers on either side of the window, there are 1,000 organ pipes. As he descends, he's coming into the choir stalls. These also are of Appalachian oak. The Stations of the Cross are done on canvas and then mounted on the panels. Going around the panels, at the top of the panels, the frieze is the one of the symbol of the vine and the branches, Christ united with all the members of his church, which embraced everyone who attends here and everyone who has been baptized, Christ the vine and we the branches. As he descends into the pews there, and onto the floor. Floor is of slate, which was quarried in Rocky Hill. The exterior of the chapel is made of Princeton stone, quarried on the property. He's showing now the stations and the lower windows. The large candle in the center is just for Eastertide. It's the Paschal candle and is lit to remind us of Christ, the risen Christ, at this season of the year, the Eastertide. Behind it is the lectern, in which the word, scripture is.
To Dayton. Oh, I said, oh boy, I'll never hear the end. I went to a school board meeting that night. So somebody called me and said to me, one of the teachers called. In those days, there was a lot of in and outs going on, you know. And you better not go to that school board meeting tonight. And I said, why? Because you're going to be holding the bag. Now he's there. I went to every school board member and pointed. I was told not to come to this meeting tonight because I was going to be holding the bag. Can you tell me what's in that bag? Well, they all started to laugh. You know, there was a lot of inside work going on. They never got rid of that refrigerator. Another thing is...
Don't mess with Josie, right?
No, Mrs. Schaub and I, Mrs. Terhune, about 5 of us women. Mrs. Schaub is the one that started the library in Dean School. And we volunteered and did that work. She never got any credit. She started the library. And I was not a librarian. I didn't know from nothing but what she taught me. And that's how our library was starting, but she never got any credit for it.
Well, she got it now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Mrs. Schaub was she from the area?
Oh, yeah.
What was her maiden name?
What was Schaub's name that built the houses? What was the man that built your father's house? What was his name? Morell?
James Morell.
James Morell.
So he was the contractor in
He
Deans.
was a contractor.
Yes.
And my father worked for James Morell.
Did they dig the foundations with
Yeah,
horses?
they used to make cement blocks and built the complete house. Some of the contractors I remember was my father, Messina.
Messina was a building contractor?
No, Messina's, I think there were 2 boys in Messina families that were carpenters.
Carmen, you told me about the story one time about the foundation, how you got the foundation up. You remember that story about how...
You mean at my house?
Yeah.
He built that all by hand, that house.
Before I got married, I bought a piece of ground from Mrs. Rule on the corner of Deans Lane and the Trenton Road, which is now the US 1. And I started to build a house there, and I dug the cellar by hand. And I finally put a foundation down and had Laura and his sons help me put the foundation. Then I ordered some blocks and I put the corners up, and I used to put those blocks down after work, and I used to get maybe around 18 blocks a night. I figured by the time I got 1,400 blocks up, that would be almost over a year. So I finally got talking to the mason foreman at the New Brunswick post office new building, and I asked him if he could get somebody and himself to come over and set those blocks. I said, I got it started, but I said, I've been putting only a few blocks at night. And he said, when do you want to do it? I said, whenever you get a chance. I says, so I made sure that I had ordered enough blocks, which amounted to, near as I can remember, around 1,500 blocks. So they showed up on the following Saturday morning with 2 cars and 8 bricklayers. And I said, oh my gosh, I says, I don't have any scaffolds for these people to work on, with the exception of one side. So US 1 was being constructed. They had a lot of drums and planks and so on laying along the road. So not being too far, we went over and swiped the drums and put drums on all around the foundation and put the blanks on. They started at 8 o'clock, and by 12 o'clock the 1,400 blocks were set. I had gotten a wash tub filled up with ice and put some beer, got sandwiches and cold cuts. After they got through, they helped themselves to the refreshments, and I went to the foreman and I told him, how much money do I owe you? He said, what money? He said, no, you don't want to. He said, no, he said, forget it. In those days, a $20 bill was a lot of money, so I took a $20 bill and I went to give it to him, and I told him I didn't know some of these boys, maybe they didn't want just beer, might want to stop at a gin mill and get something stronger. That $20 bill was tossed back and forth, so I finally put it in my pocket. Again, that don't happen these days.
Now, who was that foreman? Who was the mason? Was the late mason a local person?
Mr. Greco.
The foreman's name, near as I can remember, was Charlie Formica, who lived in North Brunswick.
Formica, yeah.
No, Formica, something like that.
And he became a big mason contractor, or later on, did he continue in that?
Who's that?
Formica. He worked at the post office when they were building that.
He was the mason foreman at when the New Brunswick new post office was built.
Very good.
Well, what else do you folks want to know? I could tell you a lot, but I better not on video.
They used to have a lot of good parties here. I remember that when I was a little kid. I remember you guys having nice parties on.
Yes, Carmine, in back of the, my old house, he built a beautiful chicken house. It was 2 stories. Upstairs was 3 rooms. And of course, Carmine was a gentleman farmer, and I took care of the chickens. And then, just before we put the chickens in, it was my Lorraine's first birthday. And we had the most beautiful party. Everybody was saying, it's a shame to use this as a chicken house. So one day, I taking care of the chickens, and my cousin used to play for the St. Louis Browns, and he played for the Chicago White Sox. He was a big wig.
Now, what's his name?
His name was Alan Zarillo. Played for Alan Zarillo.
From North Brunswick?
No, he was from New York, from California,
okay.
But he played with the Boston Red Sox.
St. Louis Browns.
Yeah. So anyhow, he said to me, he said, you know, he called one day and he said, we got the tickets. So he'd send us tickets. So big shots, I'd feed those chickens, you know, and get on that bus and go to New York. Then all the kids would meet us. He was a handsome son of a gun. So one day I said, boy, these kids waiting at the bus. He said, tell me my wife. So that we signed, Mrs. Zarillo, Mrs. Zarillo. So another day, Louise Boston said to me, there's a party going on. They all come to my daughter's birthday. So I went to the birthday party. I fed the chickens, And when I come back, the white chickens have a habit of cannibalizing each other. Once they see blood, they'll draw everything out of them.
Right.
Well, I get home, and it looked like somebody with a gun. I saw about 25 chickens all splattered all over the floor. I took a sack, put them in, and I went and threw them in the woods. Because I said, oh my God, he'll want to hear him when I come home. But he was a gentleman farmer. I had to change, when they used to get that streptococcus, you know, the chicken from one to the other, had to change her shoes. So one day I had put Lorraine down, she was about 2 years old. And I put her in a crib, and I was very careful. And I went out, the feed man had come from Warner's States to deliver my feed for the chickens. And all of a sudden, I hear little footsteps. Lorraine had got out of the crib. And as I was going in with the feed man, big rat like this jumped right over my head. Because they used to go for feed. And he says to me, lady, I'm going to tell you one thing, don't you ever do that again. The child is more important than that feed. Suppose that rat would have really got on her. I said, thank you, sir, it'll never happen again. But I had a good time in life, it didn't bother me.
Now, Louise...
Louise Basso was my neighbor. Louise Basso, Kenneth Basso, he belonged to Lines too, Kenneth Basso.
And what was Louise's maiden name?
Oceaner.
And did they always live on Deans Lane?
Yes, they lived right next door to me. There's where the Oceaners live now. Alfred Oceaner lives there now.
We'll do that.
Pardon?
We'll interview the Oceaners.
You're going to do that?
Hopefully if they'll do it.
Yeah, I don't know. Lena's very shy.
Al's outgoing though, he'll do it.
Yeah, maybe he will.
And Louise.
And Louise Basso lived right next door to me. But we were never had an argument. If there was any argument with the children.
You had very good times down at West Virginia Wesleyan too, didn't you?
Oh, yes. I used to go to West Virginia Wesleyan. I was always in the frat house with the boys. I had a ball. Always looked for me. Oh, I was always had a good time. I mean, we had bad days and good days, but you can't be telling people about the bad because they don't have bad days of their own.
That's a good spirit.
So my doctor said to me the other day, and I said to Dr. Wong, I said, well, I think the guy that gave me this is tired of it. He wants it back. He could have it. Because you got some sense of humor.
Well, good luck with your surgery.
Thank you.
And we thank you so much. Did an
Well,
excellent job.
Yes.
I enjoy having you and Tony over. It was a pleasure. Can I make you a cup of coffee or tea?
Thank you.
I think we have another interview, right, Tony?
Another interview at 11.
Well, it was a pleasure having you.
Same here.
And I hope this video turns out all right.
Sure
I'm
will.
sure it will.
He's
Thank you. Okay.
I'd like to add to what I've already said, that Deans also had a butcher shop which was run by the Bakota family, and they used to deliver meat on the homes on Deans Lane. The people on Deans Lane never used to have to go out to go shopping, and fish was delivered by the Baker family, which lived in Sand Hills area, and most of the grocery was purchased from the old natives of the Sanawas family of Mama Junction. Used to come by Deans Lane with a horse and wagon that we used to call them the Sandazusa delivery, who used to deliver all the groceries and stuff to the families along Dean's Road. Tony.